Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started now. Thanks for coming back. Hopefully, have a little more elbow room here as we open it up. But glad to have Paul Jasa here. He's an extension engineer, and he'll probably give you a little more background than I will, but he's done a lot with cover crops. Many of you probably seen him, probably heard him talk. Manages and runs the Rogers Memorial Farm east of town, so he's done a lot of no-till and cover crops. A lot of experience. He's got a lot of pictures, a lot of ideas. So. If you have questions, this is the guy to ask. But thanks, Paul, for coming in. Appreciate it, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right, Tyler. I was here. I've lost track of when. A couple years ago, to talk about basics on cover crops. I looked at that presentation, pulled out some of the slides I talked about then because you want step 2 rather than the basics. And so I'm going to throw up residue and soil biology are a couple of important things to think about when you're looking at cover crops. What I'm looking at with my cover crops, the work I'm doing, is to build a more resilient soil system. Now, Justin talked about biomass. If you're into livestock, biomass is important. That's the food. I'm not looking at biomass. I'm looking more at what is happening in the soil itself. And I'm going to show you some things that I've learned across the years. Been working with cover crops since about 2000. I've got some continuous plots. Been going since 2005. And so again, I'm going to show you some of that information. Again, a wide variety of reasons why you want to use cover crops. I put erosion control on the top. Some of the rains we've been getting lately, we need a lot more cover crops out there to anchor that soil, absorb that raindrop impact. The NRCS has some special emphasis on gully erosion control, trying to do that as well. Those other things, I don't have time to go through them all. I put forage and grazing on the bottom. My personal opinion is, if it's a forage and grazing, it is a forage and grazing crop. It is not a cover crop. And you manage them differently. Cover crops, I'll seed at a half rate compared to a forage crop. I won't put fertilizer on a cover crop. I will on a grazing crop because I need the food, quality food. So again, too often when someone goes in and talks to the NRCS about equip, they might ask, are you going to graze it? And you go, well, I don't know. I'm going to wait and see what grows. No, you decide up front because you're going to even select different species if you're going to be grazing compared to just cover. So again, those things, there's all sorts of references you can read about how to select what to use where. But again, I'm looking at building the soil. This is from a friend of mine, Ralph Derpsch, long-term no-till soil. That soil biology, it's the root exudates coming out of a growing root that actually builds soil when it comes to building organic matter. There's some work being done now. Jerry Hatfield, ARS, is finding out that about 80% of the carbon in the soil is from the root exudates, not from the residue decaying. A lot of people say, well, you can't build organic matter because you don't have enough biomass there. No, it's the roots putting stuff into the soil, feeding the microbes, the biology active soil, that's where you build soil. So that's what we want to look at. And a lot of people then talk about conservation agriculture, the soil health principles, the 5 key things there. I will admit I don't have the 5th one, the Rogers Memorial Farm. We don't have livestock there. But again, minimal soil disturbance, I'm a no-tiller. Keep the soil covered. Leave the residue in the field or have something growing to keep the soil covered. Diversity of plants. We need that diversity to feed the system. We need that diversity to attract the beneficials. We need that diversity just because we all like diversity as well. So is our soil. And it's the living root. As much of the year as possible is what we're after there. Livestock adds a lot more because it is basically what the buffalo did to build our prairie systems. Not a continuous grazing livestock, but a mob grazing or movement grazing. Integrating livestock, that's a whole different presentation. In the Rogers Memorial Farm, we got a set of plots there established in 1981 comparing different tillage systems. And this just shows no-till next to a plow system, soybeans coming up through grain sorghum residue the year this picture was taken. But again, when it comes to the soil health, stop doing the tillage, your soil health builds. With no-till, it builds for a while, but it only builds because when the living root is there. Corn, soybeans, grain sorghum, we only have living root in the soil about 5 months a year. The cover crop's going to add to that. But when it comes to our soil biology, here I'm Stu Hoff, our farm manager, is planting down the old row, planting soybeans. A couple of visitors there, couldn't believe we're planting through that. And someone says, where's all the root balls that roll out when I plant down the old row? If you're rolling out root balls, it tells me you don't have soil biology yet. Soil biology, the root balls will rot off underneath. After observing this, when I was going out to do tillage on my long-term tillage plots, my first pass of the disking, I took a hold of corn stalk, pulled one up, went over to no-till, pulled one up, held them up, snapped this picture. The one on your left is the disc plot. There's no soil biology there. Those roots are still there. You hit that with a planter, it will roll out a root ball. The one on the right is rotted off from below. That's the no-till. Soil biology is rotting that off. The good news is it's cycling nutrients back into the soil. It's cycling, feeding the soil system. And once we knock that residue over, now our residue is touching the soil, and again, that residue is cycling fairly fast for us. I have trouble keeping residue in the fields because we have so much biology activity. And again, you don't see any root balls roll out there. I like planting down the old row because that's the most biology active area in the field. That's where the roots were last year. That's where my roots are going to be this year. I hate planting in wheel tracks. When I started thinking more about soil biology, though, let's step it up. Now, corn, soybeans, like I say, you've only got about 5 months a year living root. Increase that biological diversity, we can put wheat in the rotation or forages in the rotation or use cover crops, but just get some roots there more often and different types of roots. Again, there's different ways of doing that. Wheat, I like that because I can do a cover crop after the wheat. A lot of people say, well, wheat, you can't make as much money as corn, soybeans. Well, if you're only raising corn and soybeans, I guarantee you wheat's not going to make as much. But if I do something after the wheat to harvest carbon dioxide and sunlight that's free, that I don't store unless I grow something, and then use that, I'm using it to build the soil. A livestock man might use it to feed the livestock. But again, think about diversity. Get more out there. Wheat helps a lot. We got some guys going to peas now. Peas get harvested early, gives you a cool season legume for your crop rotation. There's a producer near Ravenna that runs peas, then does a diverse mix after that for grazing. He says, I don't have problems with soybeans anymore because I quit raising the soybeans. He's doing this on irrigation. So again, there's other crops out there to think about putting diversity in the system. My long-term tillage plot started in 1981. In 2007, I took a couple of the treatments, changed them over to have cover crops on them. I started with just cereal rye. I've switched now to cereal rye and Austrian winter peas mixed together. Corn bean rotation is cool or warm season grass, warm season broadleaf. My covers then are cool season grass, cool season broadleaf. So I've got all crop types there. This is in a warm spring, got some growth coming there. I tend to terminate mine early. When you terminate at this growth stage, you don't have a lot of nitrogen tie-up. If you let it get tall, there's gonna be a lot of nitrogen tie-up on surface applied nitrogen. So again, I tend to terminate early. A lot of people say you didn't raise as much biomass. I says, but I had a living root in the off season. That's what I'm after. And my long-term tillage plots, this is the day in late March when I went out to do the first disking. And on the right half of the screen is fall chiseled. Every year since 1981, then spring disc to smooth it out to plant. On the left side of the screen is no-till since 1981, with cover crops since 2007. The soil biology is such that the residue is disappearing in no-till. In the tilled system, everybody says you got to do tillage to get rid of residue. The tillage killed the soil biology such that the residue doesn't even disappear. Again, you'll read all these salesmen say, well, I can buy this additive to put on the soil to make it more biology active. Well, in a tilled system, you might get a response to that additive. In a no-till system where you got good soil biology, save your money. You've got biology already working for you. That cereal rye there is just breaking dormancy there. This was a cool spring. And again, you don't know when you're seeing that in the fall, what's the next spring going to be like. Again, diversity. Cool season grass, got wheat. Cool season broadleaf, the peas. The warm season broadleaf, soybeans. Warm season grass, the corn. Get that diversity. And like I say, I'm using the Austrian winter peas, cereal rye. That's what it looks like in the fall. In the spring, if I plant deep, those peas do a good job. If I plant shallow, those peas don't overwinter. So again, I'm getting my diversity there. Now, I've also done a little bit of work looking at different cover crops and different systems as well. At tillage plots are in corn and soybean rotation. This is in a corn, soybean, wheat rotation of this set of plots. We use the crust buster drill. I like that because depth control's behind, leaves my residue standing. This is about 200 bushel corn residue day after harvest out there seeding the cover crop. A lot of people say, well, don't you need vertical tillage to get rid of that residue? I say, why? Well, vertical tillage will say, well, cut and size the residue. I said, so does my drill. Well, vertical tillage will put the residue in contact with the soil so the soil microbes can break it down. So does my drill. The drill puts a living seed in the soil as well to get soil biology fed. That's my vertical tillage tool. Now, seeding Austrian winter peas, this is the same field the next March. Where'd all the corn residue go? That's the soil biology I've got. I'm feeding it. Austrian winter peas coming out of dormancy there. In a warm spring, they'll get about that tall, fix about 100 pounds of N for you. In a cool spring, they get about this tall, and you wonder why you did it. The living root is still there. Now, this is on a study I'm comparing legume versus carbon cover crops. And this is another set of plots. I got all three sets of plots there because it's a corn, bean, wheat rotation. After the corn, I'm doing the cereal rye, Austrian winter peas, carbon versus nitrogen. After the corn, after the wheat, I'm doing bin run milo, bin run soybeans, carbon versus nitrogen. Now my wheat gets seeded immediately after soybean harvest, so there's no cover there. And so in your mind, imagine base rotation is 2 carbons, 1 nitrogen. I add either 2 more carbons or 2 more nitrogens. So I got a 4-to-1 or a 2-to-3 ratio carbon to nitrogen. That doesn't mean a lot to you, but what I'm looking at is what does it do for soil diversity? Again, this is cereal rye just breaking dormancy there. That is no-till corn in a corn, bean, wheat rotation. Add the cover. Look how much residue disappeared. And it's contrary to a lot of people's thinking when they say, I got too much residue out there. I say, you have too much residue because you don't have soil biology. Plant a cover, feed the system. Now, I let that rye grow to replace the cover that's being eaten up. After wheat, we like covers throughout the Memorial Farm. That's already seeded to a cover. Again, with that drill, the depth control behind leaves all my wheat stubble standing. And I like a diverse mix. Now, when Justin talked about insects, I love flowers in there to bring in the pollinators, bring in the beneficial insects. A diverse mix, typically, it's a pretty thin stand, but I typically go with a couple warm season grasses, a couple of cool season grasses, a couple of warm season legumes, a couple of cool season legumes, a couple of brassicas, a couple of pollinators. So 12 to 14 way mix after wheat. Costs only about $20, $25 an acre, depending on what you're throwing in there. But again, I got that living root there. Everything in that mix, frost kills. And after wheat, I love that because next spring, when I go out to the plant, it's easy to plant in. This is into wheat stubble. No volunteer wheat. We've eliminated volunteer wheat by putting cover crop in our wheat stubble. If you've got something growing, Mother Nature doesn't feel the need to grow something else. Volunteer wheat, we've virtually eliminated by doing our covers. So again, Justin mentioned weed control. The weed control is not so much from the biomass, it is the fact that there is something growing. Mother Nature has less pressure to put something else there. Ralph Derpsch again sent me this photo. And again, this is a black oats cover crop rolled down as weed control. And yes, you get some weed control by keeping the sun off the soil surface so the weeds are less likely to grow. And a lot of people say, well, it's a little allelopathic effect. They've seen that with cereal rye really suppressing weeds. Well, it suppresses weeds while the rye is growing because you have something growing. It suppresses weeds after the fact. There is some allelopathic effect, but a lot of times farmers say, well, my corn looks nitrogen deficient. My corn stand isn't as good. If you surface apply your nitrogen, UAN solution on top, I guarantee you this will be a problem. You must inject your nitrogen below the residue and have a healthy starter on that planter. Within 3-4 inches of the row, I want 30 to 50 pounds of nitrogen. Then that's not a problem. Well, there's a lot of guys spraying UAN solution on top. They say cereal rye is really hurting me. When I spray my cereal rye out this tall, I never have a problem. If you let it get that tall where you got stems, you'll have nitrogen tie-up. So again, nitrogen management changes a little bit. Keith Lewin has crop management diagnostic clinics that he does up at the Eastern Nebraska NREC. I still call it ARDC, guys. But we had 1 year, did some demonstrations there. And there's actually 3 sets of plots. There's one up in the background, one in the foreground, one off the side of the picture. He had wheat in one, triticale in the other, and cereal rye in the other. The first 10 foot of the plot, he did not plant to the cover. The next 10 foot, he sprayed out a month before planting. The next 10 foot sprayed out 2 weeks before planting. And the last 10 foot there, sprayed out the day of planting. And actually there's 10 foot more. Took the residue off. As you look down the road, the corn looks about the same all the way across. Look right next to the corn row. There's a mark there. Put down 50 pounds in right next to the corn. That took care of any nitrogen tie-up that we had from leaving that residue there. Now what's interesting is the soybeans in back, you can see the residue where there was a cover and killed a month early. There's basically no residue left. That extra biological diversity there ate up the soybean residue, in fact. Likewise here is next to no soybean residue there. So again, soil biology is there. It's a long-term no-till plot as well. But again, the key there that I'm showing you is nitrogen close to the row. It can be dribbled out the back of the planter, just something so it's a concentrated band next to the row to be reined in at root zone. If you're nitrogen deficient at this growth stage, you're going to hurt yourself a number of rows around the ear of corn. That's determined at this growth stage. Now, going back to my research, that corn, bean, wheat rotation I told you about, this is the wheat leg, cover crop, bin run grain sorghum, bin run soybeans. People say, well, cover crops cost so much. That grain sorghum stand, bin run, that's 35 cents an acre seed cost. That's a cheap cover. Beauty of that is it frosts off, don't even have to spray it. Next spring, you come back in there and plant corn in that. And when you look there, it's all looks pretty dead. Started this in 2005, started this study. First few years, not much there for weed control, not much there for differences in yield. The longer I stuck with it, the more differences are showing up. In 2008, started showing some yield differences. Plain wheat stubble at 166, where the milo cover crop was there, 175, where the bean cover crop was there, 179. Now I'm going to change that milo and bean, I'm going to call it carbon and nitrogen on the next slide. But again, we're seeing some healthier soil. We're seeing increased yields in the wheat as well. The beans, not near as much. And beans are fairly forgiving. 2012, a drought year. The covers didn't hurt me. 2013, a little increase there. 2015, big increase in the nitrogen. We put down 200 pounds in, or we're fertilizing for a 200 bushel yield goal. That's what we're fertilizing for. And no cover crop, 197. The carbon cover crop, we use anhydrous injected and use a starter fertilizer, 202. The nitrogen, the beans fixed some nitrogen there. Out of this study from 2005 until today, I had 3 years, there was enough yield increase to pay for the covers all the rest of the years. I never had yield loss. Well, until I tweaked the system a little bit, playing with it. I looked at that yield response to the nitrogen, and I go, all right, 200 pounds in, let's cut it to 170 pounds in for a 200 bushel yield goal on wheat stubble. So there's no legume credit. 2016, where there's no cover crop, 170 pounds in, and you still got 195. The carbon, the nitrogen tie-up, I lost some yield. But the nitrogen, the soybeans fixed enough nitrogen there, I didn't lose yield, I actually gained some yield. So again, I had some nitrogen tie-up with my carbon there that hurt me in yield. We back to putting on 200 pounds for our 200 bushel yield goal. This year I had no problem. So again, nitrogen, make sure you cycle your residue as well. Here was a surprise for me in 2015, I believe it was. 35 cents worth of bin run grain sorghum. That's on the right side. This is in the spring when Stu was going out to put down an early pre-plant herbicide. Where there was no cover crop, we have volunteer wheat. Where we had the cover crop, there's no volunteer wheat. That's not been sprayed yet. He's applied anhydrous already. You can see the knife marks in the wheat stubble. You can't see it in the cover crop. Stuart loves the cover crop, what it does for anchoring the soil. The anhydrous applicator does minimal soil disturbance then. He likes that. Now, The replicated strips, these are 15 feet wide. The next one over there, you can see a little bit of volunteer wheat. That's in the soybeans. Some volunteer wheat got through there. Now, he put the burn down on because that volunteer wheat was there, but where we have cover crops on our wheat stubble, we usually don't need the burn down. Come about the middle of May, time for post-emerge. Again, the right side of the screen is the grain sorghum residue. The left side of the screen is no cover crop. We can save a post-emerge because of the weed control of that cover crop from the year before. Come near harvest. That's where the grain sorghum residue was. There's the no cover crop. We got weed control almost season long for not much money because we put that cover crop out there. The next year, this is 2016. No, I'm sorry, this is 2017. Stuart says, you're going to quit doing the cover crops. I go, why? He goes, well, the deer come up out of the creek and they cross there, they're grazing on the cover crops and they're pooping out locust tree seeds with a little fertilizer. I brought out the plot map. The heavy strip of locust trees is the non-cover crop strip. Now, I had no idea why, but locust trees and no-till, how do you take care of them? Snip, spray. Roundup, or not Roundup, Tordon, RTU. I did that to clean up those plots. That was in 2018, the plots were in a different field. The same thing happened, except the plots in that field are 12 rows wide, 800 feet long, rather than 6 rows wide, 300 feet long. I started counting, and the no cover crop strip, I quit counting when I got to 100 trees in that strip. In the soybean cover crop, the 3 reps averaged 21. In the grain sorghum cover crop, I cut 2 trees between the 3 reps, 800 feet long, 12 rows wide. It wasn't just once. It's 2 different fields, 2 different years. And again, cover crops are helping. Back to that same side hill field. This is after wheat harvest this summer. Stuart went out and sprayed. That's why the weeds here on the end are dead. There's a few weeds coming now. The white flag is no cover crop strip. These others are drilled to the cover crops. And there's the grain sorghum growing, the soybeans growing, the no cover crop strips are weeds. Again, I like the cover crops for weed control. Now, I hated those weeds. And here's a view from the tractor seat, shredding them down so they don't go to seed. Again, I like the covers. Mare's tail, Roundup Ready mare's tail. This is at actually Burns Brothers Green Cover Seeds did a demonstration. This is only 20 pounds per acre seed rate here. There's a couple of mare's tail in there. They left a gap. There's a lot of mare's tail. Here's 40 pound per acre seed rate. Again, suppressing weeds, mare's tail, Palmer amaranth, others. If you got something growing, less likely to have weeds. Gary gave me this one. A little skip in the cover crop, and that's exactly where the mare's tail was. This one on purpose, they plugged one opener on the drill. That's common oats. That one opener is plugged, those are weeds. You have something growing, Mother Nature doesn't feel like it has to have something growing. That's why I like cover crops. I like cover crops seeded immediately after harvest. And I say that because we used to raise seed wheat for our foundation seed division. When you're raising seed wheat, you leave the outside half pass roughly, because they don't want to bring in brome heads and everything else. Well, when Stuart finished combining the field, I seeded cover crops on everything except this outside pass. It was a week later he cleaned up that outside pass, half pass I should say. After 12 weeks of growth, versus 11 weeks of growth. This is seeded 1 week later. Again, if you have livestock, you're trying to grow biomass, seed immediately after harvest. That's the most moisture you're going to have because when the crop matured, that's the most moisture to get that cover crop going. Now, after corn and soybean harvest this year, it was a little difficult to get cover crop seeded. I did get mine done. Here is a study, a little demonstration I did last year. This is seeded the day after harvest. This waited 2 weeks. This is 2 weeks later, 2 weeks later, 2 weeks later. Again, if you're growing biomass for livestock, seed immediately after harvest. And what was interesting is, as we went later, we had the volunteer wheat. Early stuff we did not. Back to that first field, 12 weeks growth, 11 weeks growth. Now this half pass was seeded the day that was taken off. This half pass was seeded actually a week after the wheat harvest. You say, well, so getting down close. The day after harvest, a week after harvest. Mother Nature grew weeds. Here is my diverse mix. This is no cover crop. Look at all the weeds. On the other side, these are the same weeds. On the other side here is a single species. This is chickweed vetch, a legume fixed nitrogen. It suppressed most of the weeds except velvet leaf. I have no idea why velvet leaf got through that one. So again, when you're going for weed control, there's a lot of research being done now on which cover crops suppress weeds. It depends on what your weeds are as well. Usually, the more you've got in your diverse mix, the more weeds you can suppress. Now, another thing, we start thinking about soil biology. Think about soil temperature. One of the concepts is keep the soil covered. We want to keep the sun off the soil. This is back to my tillage plots. This is simply residue versus not residue on tillage versus no-till. First week of June, that grain sorghum basically went dormant. This kept growing. When the combine rolled, that was 35 bushel difference, is the lack of cover. So I started looking a little bit now at soil temperature and biology activity. This is the first day of summer, June 21. This is roughly sun straight overhead, 1 o'clock with daylight saving time. And it says, let's take a look at soil temperatures. Side of the barn, 86 degrees. We used the infrared thermometer, shot the side of the barn in the shade. Shot the bean canopy, 76 degrees. The beans are transpiring, that's a cooling mechanism. Bare soil, 133. I say keep the soil covered. Think about soil biology. Think about 133. 133 in a steak is rare. You throw a steak in the grill, 5 minutes this side, 5 minutes this side, get up to 133, you can eat it because you supposedly killed all the bacteria and bad stuff. Bare soil temperature 133, I'm killing the soil as well. Top of the surface of the residue, 124. It's hot. But underneath the residue, 76. Keep the soil covered. And again, I didn't think too much of it until I did some traveling. I was in South Australia in an area of 8 to 10 inches of rainfall. They're using cover crops. And I was thinking, all right, is it because they want a living root? No, so they want a living soil. Here's a guy who's been no-tilling, he says, for about 15 years. He bales off his wheat stubble. He has a hole opener on the drill, does a lot of tillage. That does not look like a healthy soil. I was there, it was about 90 degrees, and I was blessed because the cold front come through. It was 120 the week before I was there. Soil temperatures were about 160, I was told. That soil basically got sterilized with the heat. Now, there's 2 sets of stubble there. The neighbor uses a stripper head harvest, keeps the sun off the soil surface. He's been no-tilling about 15 years as well. Look at the roots. The stripper head harvest, the roots are already decayed off. Where it's been long-term no-till, but there's no soil biology, the roots haven't decayed off. The soil biology isn't there. So again, it's temperature management. Keep that soil covered. Keep the sun off that soil surface. Keep it cooler. And again, an 8 to 10 inch rainfall area. Drug my foot. And that one I even scratched my head on. Cover crop is growing and there's more moisture on that side than on the bare side. This farmer was proud of his cover crop. I looked at that and go, huh? He says, that doubles my wheat yield. Go, huh? It doubles his wheat yield because it keeps his soil alive. If he didn't have the cover crop, All that soil moisture evaporated out, and the soil was dry. He had enough moisture there, and I pulled up one of the sunflowers. That's all the root he had. But that root was keeping the soil alive, feeding the soil system. It wasn't biomass, it's the living root. Oops. Doubles his wheat yield. My cover crop gets a little taller than wheat stubble. It gets up pretty high before the frost comes and kills it. I showed you the planter. Again, keep that soil alive. Yeah, it's not alive now. I don't have a living root there. I'm still playing it cautious. I've listened to too many people saying the cover crop's going to use up all your water. I don't think it does. I think it keeps the soil alive, makes the water more efficient. Like I say, I spray a lot out early. Spray it out at this stage. I don't need the extra nitrogen. Once it's growing higher, yes, get some nitrogen close to the row. Build soil biology. A lot of ways to do it. Manure can be one. That's why a lot of people say integrate livestock back into the system. The livestock does not actually add extra nutrients. That actually takes some nutrients away when you're grazing the covers. But what it does is it helps redistribute things for you, and it does the first step of processing it for you when it comes out as feces and urine. But again, adding soil biology is going to help. There's a lot of guys who like wheat, oats in the rotation, so they have some place to spread the manure in the summertime. I grew up northeast Nebraska, and at that time it was Wallbaum's, the chicken company up there. They were actually paying farmers to raise oats just so they have some place to put their chicken manure in the summer. Again, the soil biology. I know some no-tillers up there, their entire fertilizer program was chicken manure. They loved it when it comes to soil biology. Now, when it comes to manure, surface applied, lawn pestle, feedlot manure, harrowed it to smooth it a little bit, seeded to cover. And we see a lot of this more out in Pennsylvania, the Delmar Peninsula, around Washington, D.C., where surface applied manure and they're seeding and cover immediately to take some of those nutrients, grow it up in a biological form so it's not washed away. And again, if you need manure management, maybe wheat or oats, some of your rotation, your peas, you do something like this and build soil even faster yet. Or don't let soils go dormant. Prevented planting, plant a cover. Rod Sassine had low-lying area along the Elkhorn River, planted in August. That's when as soon as he could get out there and do it, it was so wet. Mick's got a couple low areas. He'll tell you that when you plant that, it actually helps de-water it, and you can actually run on it a little sooner next spring. That's a good idea. Hail. Your nutrients are already out there for that corn crop. At this growth stage, you probably use some of the nitrogen, but I want a living root out there to feed the soil system. You know, something like this. That was a little earlier hailstorm. The corn wasn't near as big. There's a lot of residual nitrogen out there. Grow some, put it in a biological form. Don't let it get leached away. 2011, Missouri river bottoms are flooded. And a lot of people says, well, we can't do much about that. Think about soil life. Saturated soils, no living root. It was not pretty, by the way. John Wilson went out and worked with a producer. No cover. This is irrigated corn. Had no cover. 210 bushel of corn the next year. He put out 75 pounds of oats till about the end of February, beginning of March. Get a living root in the system and wake the soil back up. Look how much yield he picked up. Feed the soil. Keep that soil alive. Did oats pea mix there, thinking he could get some nitrogen, thinking he could get some diversity. He picked up a little more yield there, probably not enough to pay for the peas. But oats, just to wake that soil up and get it alive, makes a big difference.
Paul, on those flooded soil situations, did it do any good to know that year when it rained? Mold and stuff?
Question here is on a flooded soil situation, yeah, nothing growing there, Mother Nature will get you some weeds. You let them go. Yes, that will feed the soil system. Yes, that it will be a plus. The problem is if they go to seed, you don't want to mow them down or get them up, get some height, spray them out, let them de-water it so I can seed something else. And again, that something else depends where you're at. For me, Ben Run Milo is cheap cover, grows fast, handles the heat of the summer. So again, there's options out there. Now, a lot of people say weeds are the poor man's cover crop, or volunteer weed is the poor man's cover crop. They can be. but you need to manage them so they don't go to seed. We don't let the cover crops go to seed. Don't let the weeds go to seed. Again, if you're doing livestock, diversity is good. The diversity is good for their diet. The diversity is good for the soil as well. Again, livestock to me is a completely different thing. When you're running your species, your fertilizer, you expect it to use some water because you're growing feed. I'm not expecting my covers to use a lot of water. That's why I spray them out early, or I go with winter kill so I can recover water. The no-brainers, after low residue crops, get some residue out there. Early harvest, like corn silage or wheat or peas, get something growing to get that living root out there. And the one that catches some people by surprise, soils that receive more water than you can store in the profile. Dennis Bauer used to be our extension educator up in Ainsworth. He said, we've been using cover crops in the sand hills for over 50 years. That's nothing new. They're sandy soils. You need a cover there to keep the wind off of them. Chop silage for the cattle. That cover crop then was grazing or fall pasture. Gave the pasture rangeland a rest. But the sands can only store about 1 inch of water per foot. A 4-foot root zone can only store about 4 inches of water. From harvest that corn silage to planting next year's whatever, if you get more than 4 inches of rainfall, you can't store it anyway, why not grow something? Or you go to Dave Brandt in Ohio, gets 50 inches of rain. His soil can't store it, grow a cover. We're sort of in an odd place here. I'm not sure how much we can store because I'm not sure how much is coming. This fall, a lot of us are ending this season with a full soil moisture profile. Maybe an early spring cover would be a plus. Maybe not, I don't know. Erosion control, I mentioned that earlier. These last couple of years, we've had some intense rains. And again, climate resiliency, soil resiliency, covers are going to add to that. This is from Dan Gillespie. This is some Norcroft soils, northeast Nebraska, about 10% slope. You can see this cover wasn't very tall when he sprayed it out, planted his corn, 5-inch rain, and that's the concentrated flow area. Anchored the soil, corn didn't wash out. Again, full width cover on this situation. And too often I've seen this. A producer who's a no-tiller, he goes out there and he discs in that little gully. Next rain comes and it washes right back out. You need to anchor that soil. And again, that's where NRCS has got some work on grass waterways is what we're supposed to put in, right? You know, our big sprayers and big planters, we hate those, don't we? I like what I call annual waterways. Fill in the gully, shape it, and again, this is Dan Gillespie with this track filler, blade on the back. Get it shaped, get it seeded, get something growing there. And again, an annual waterway system. That's cereal rye. Goes out there and does his burn down before he plants the soybeans, he kills that rye, but the soil was anchored. Again, use that system. Some random ones, just the concentrated flow areas. Planted soybeans there. When he sprayed the Roundup, took out the cereal rye. Here's one with oats planted in the spring. This is drainage right off the farmstead. That's why the white rock is there. But I love in the background too, there's a pivot tracker on that hillside. Filled that and seeded it, anchored that soil. Again, it's a cover, but it's not full width, a lot cheaper. Here's one I hit a few years ago. That's oats planted in the spring, that's corn. And I figured it was Roundup Ready corn. When he sprayed that, he was going to take out the oats. Turned out it was not Roundup Ready corn. He let the oats go and it went to head. I talked to him after that. I said, did that hurt your yield a little bit? He says, yeah, but at least I had corn there, didn't wash out. After a rain, I drove back to this field, and this is his neighbor. This is another neighbor. This is another neighbor. You can tell how white his blade was there, I think. This is the oats. It laid down in the rain, the water flowing on it, but it anchored the soil. Again, we got enough hills around here, enough concentrated flow areas. I think every one of you can use some cover crops. Start this way. Go to full fields. Go to full fields because I'm looking at building the soil. Carbon dioxide and sunlight energy gets into the soil with a living root. That's what builds the soil. Commercial for Crop Watch, our extension crop production, crop scouting newsletter during the growing season. It's also our extension portal to all our resources in extension for different crops fertilizers, whatever. With that, I had no idea how much of what to put in and take out. I do have a little bit more here on seeding equipment. We're supposed to be done by 11:30, I was told.
30. So if people have questions, you want to share that, jump in, ask whatever you might not have covered. I can hand you the mic if you're close by, and he doesn't have to repeat the question. And if not, then questions. John's got one here.
Question?
Actually, I have 3 questions.
All right.
Can I give you the mic then?
I'll take the easy one, give Justin the hard one, and Tyler gets the last one.
Where do you find bin run wheat or bin run sorghum? Yeah.
Bin run sorghum. Southeast Co-op in Beatrice. Now, technically, we use our own sorghum because we raise sorghum. And when we do that, then you know what you got as far as incoming weed seed. I got a lot of people say I'll never run bin run of anything because I have no idea what's coming with it. I caution you on that. Now, when it comes to technical rules as well, seed protection laws say you probably shouldn't do that. I don't think anyone's watching Milo that close. Roundup Ready beans, they watch that. Roundup Ready corn, you know, whatever.
Have you seen the same yield increases in beans that you have corn?
The soybeans yield increases with that long-term study, like I say, from 2005 through 2018. I've not seen the yield decrease because of the cover. I've seen increase about the best year was about a 4 bushel increase. The long-term average is less than a bushel. The one that surprised both Stuart Hoff and myself was the wheat. There's no cover immediately in front of the wheat because it's seeded after soybean harvest. Stu can see it from the combine cab after about the 3rd or 4th year, and he says we're going to start measuring the yield on the wheat as well. Wheat runs 4 to 7 bushel better.
And the last one, this will make the NRCS guy cringe. If you had a sustained cover crop system, could you eliminate the terraces? Would it shed the water?
We still have terraces in the Rogers Memorial Farm. We've looked at the economics of taking them out. I'm not sure it's there to take them out. When it comes to the peak flows that we get with these extreme storms we're getting now, I still like the idea of some runoff control. To be truthful, our terraces, we see water in them less than once a year. We've got good infiltration because of diversity in our crop rotation. We've got good infiltration because we use controlled wheel traffic as well. And so we have very little runoff. Now, as far as taking them out, I wouldn't go to that expense. As far as decreased maintenance. Pardon?
What if they're not there already?
If they're not,
Well, if you don't have terraces on a farm, and you have some efferent gullies like you were showing, could you keep from building the terraces if you were in a continuous cover crop program?
Continuous cover crop, no-till and controlled wheel traffic, you'd get enough infiltration. I don't think you need to build the terraces if they aren't there already, in my opinion. But it's going to be the continuous no-till. There's some work being done in Kansas on vertical tillage tools. And a lot of guys like the idea of vertical tillage to help cut up the residue. I say, well, I like the drill to do that. But Deanne Presley has a site that one passed the vertical tillage tool, cut infiltration in half and doubled the runoff. That's exactly the layer of soil you don't want to disturb, is that air-soil interface. People say, well, vertical tillage only runs this deep. It's not doing much damage. It's the most critical layer.
With comments about the need for terraces, has anybody started working on USLE to adjust it for continuous no-till and cover crop use? And how that might adjust spacing and
The question here, repeating it for those out there, with better infiltration, with better soil health, when you get cover crops, no-till and everything else, terraces may or may not be needed, but is there anything being done now to change terrace spacing or change terrace design because of less runoff? The models that are being worked on now, most of the models, USLE, for instance, predicts sheet erosion, does not predict gully erosion and concentrated flows. Some of these models are trying to get all these things brought together. Right now, there's not enough research base out there to make a model that's going to be used to put these things into play. Now, there are some county offices I know that Gage County years ago, if you were a long-term continuous no-tiller, whatever the terrace design spec called for, they eliminated every other terrace. They still put them on there to handle those peak flows, still handle the excess runoff. And they're doing it partially because of giving credit to the no-till, but partially because at that time they didn't have a lot of money for terraces anyway. They could spread their terrace dollars further by putting every other terrace. Now, that was sort of done by county basis. And I say that because the state agronomist here and he says,
When you talk about terrace, you're really talking about it. You probably wouldn't go.
The NRCS, you made a comment, the engineers are designing the systems. I complimented Justin on his presentation saying the systems approach. I'm an engineer by training. In training, we like to compartmentalize. Handling excess flow, they look at the terrace. They don't look at the rest of the system. The better infiltration, the less raindrop impact, less soil movement, less terrace maintenance needed because the soil's not plugging up the terrace. There's a lot of other things that go into that. But again, the engineer designing a terrace system is designed for the worst case scenario. And that's because NRCS was founded during our worst case scenario, basically the dust bowl and erosion problems we had in the 30s.
We've been using cereal rye after corn the last couple of years. No-till ground in hills. So we're doing it, but nothing after beans.
Question on cereal rye after corn, going to beans. That's the no-brainer because beans can handle that cereal rye, no problem there. He's wondering if since he's not got a cover after the soybeans, is he sort of defeating the purpose? You're not defeating, you're just not building as much as you could. You could build more by having the extra cover crop in there. Now, to help address that, I actually have in my studies, and I have not crunched all the data recently, but I got the corn, bean, wheat rotation with the cover after the corn and the wheat. But I got another set of plots where it's only after the wheat. So it's only covered once every 3 years. And so I'll have to start looking more at that data because I got long-term now. And that study was started in 2013 or 14. I've lost track now. And I talk about long-term because I'm looking at building soil health long-term. If you go out and think you're going to see the cover crop this year and you're going to see immediate return next year, you're going to be disappointed. And a lot of people say, well, it didn't pay. I asked one question, well, you talk about terraces. Terraces never paid in 1 year. Terraces never paid in probably their lifetime, other than it kept the land there such that you can pass it on to the next generation. That's what soil health's doing. We're going to keep it here for the next generation. The other question I asked, and they say it doesn't pay, I asked, do you change the oil in your tractor? Did that pay? Cost you money, but it made the tractor last longer. To me, feeding the soil is in the same category. It's going to make it last longer. That's why I go for the cheap covers. That's why I go for those at winter kill, so I don't have to spend money spraying them out. I'm looking at building the soil. Yes, I don't have the living root all year round. I don't do airplane seeding of my covers. 2 reasons. One is it's damn hard to do plot work with an airplane. They don't like those little 15-foot wide plots that are, 50 feet long. The other reason is airplane seeding a cover crop, RMA requires your cash crop to be mature before you do that, because you cannot have a second crop growing in the field. Now, to be truthful, we push that when we fly on covers into soybeans. We say do it before leaf yellow because that is going to mulch. The beans aren't mature then. So far, RMAs have sort of been ignoring us. The other thing is planting green. We talked earlier, Justin talked about it. I don't plant green except for once in a while for research purposes. As general practice, I don't plant green because, again, RMA doesn't let you. A lot of the work I am doing is what you can do. And I say that because my extension dean says you are 100% extension, you're not supposed to be doing research. Yeah, but I got the space and I got the time, I can do the research to help you guys out. not doing some creative stuff like some people are doing, the companion crop, and seed to cover when your corn's this tall. Corn roots are down deeper at that point. The cover up top is now feeding the soil system. You select a cover that grows well under the shade, then after corn harvest, the cover takes off. It's some fun stuff some other people are doing, but I'm not doing those yet. Question on, is there enough research out there that can change RMA thinking? Unfortunately, there is a lot of research out there, and I would say a lot of poor research out there. And that poor research that is published, they look at just as much as the good research. And right now, it's not conclusive enough to sway them. Now, farmers like yourselves who have figured it out and doing it, they know the benefits. But a farmer testimony doesn't sway RMA. Now, there's getting to be enough farmer testimony, they are changing some. For instance, we can't plant green. Well, if you're a long-term no-tiller using cover crops, you can plant green. You have to spray it within 5 days or 7 days? Before emergence. I think 7 days, yeah. And so there are some things they are letting slide now. I don't run residue management tools on a planter, period. And to me, the planter, you're better off leaving the residue anchored attached. Now, there is one place I'll recommend it, and that's not for you guys. You're raising canola. And it's because you have to open up that residue so the canola comes up and grows properly. If you leave the residue there, the canola will do this on you and go stemming and fall down before it sets the first leaves. But you go to canola country, they'll run residue movers all the time. I plant right down through it. And I showed pictures there. We don't roll them out because we have enough weight on the planter. We plant deep, and we just replant right through the old roots. I plant beans and milo at 2.5, corn at 3.5. And when you talk to any seed company rep out there, they've had very, very few complaints on stands that were planted too deep. They have huge complaints on stands that are bad because they're planted too shallow. The other thing is, if you set it for, an 1.5 inches or whatever, and you ride over a little bit of residue or you hit a clod, now you're at 1/2 inch. I'm at 3.5 and I ride over something, I'm still at 2.5. So you haven't planted deep. Now, preface that with long-term continuous no-till good soil structure. If you've got a disc pan down here from years of disking, I got a disc pan down here at 6 inches and I plant 3.5 inches deep, and I get a heavy rain, this gets saturated, can't soak away, that seed will rot. I got good soil structure, that heavy rain goes right on in, and I can plant deep, no problem. The other thing in planting deep is you're more buffered to soil temperature and soil moisture. You get a more uniform stand. By going deeper, my yields go up.
Downforce on your planter then?
Down pressure on the planter. Compaction with a planter is a problem in tilled soils, not in no-till. Usually it's the other way around. I see more planters operating no-till with not enough down pressure. And again, once you got soil structure there, you got roots there, compaction is not an issue.
Okay, any other questions? Not, so there's one here.
If you put on planting beans, and you got you're planting winter beans, you let them grow and plant corn later.
We have not a questionnaire on planting date, especially if you're using a legume as a cover crop. Legume cover crops, they'll fix their nitrogen in the spring. Guys planting hairy vetch, Austrian winter peas, chickling vetch, the more growth you can get there, the more nitrogen you're going to get fixed. I do not do that. In my dryland crop production, we are looking at normal to early planting for max yields. I'm not using the cover to replace purchased inputs. Now, there are a lot of farmers who are doing that, and they're doing two things. And Justin and others are involved in some of this research, looking at adjusting the planting date of the covers as well as termination date, and then adjusting planting date and harvest date of your cash crop. And I don't know if you're involved with it, but some of them are working at different maturities as well. For instance, a 95-day corn versus 105 versus 115. And if I get that corn off 2 weeks earlier and get more growth on my cover, does it help me? Or a 2.4 bean versus a 3.4 bean or whatever. Thing is, in dryland ag, a lot of times that maturity doesn't mean a lot. We plant 2-4 beans because we're going to plant wheat, and we do 3-6 beans where we're going to have no wheat after the bean harvest. And there are some years those 2-4s go dormant and the September rains come and they take off, and we actually combine them after the long season beans. Now, under irrigation, that's not near as the problem. Question on do I plant by soil temperature or calendar date, and how does the cover crop affect that soil temperature? Again, with our well-structured no-till, I plant by calendar. So if you plant by soil temperature, some springs you'd be planting in February. It just, at most people's planting depth, the soil's warm enough to be planting. The cover crop, how does it affect it? We have not seen an effect in a well-structured no-till soil. Now, what we have seen is the cover crop that overwinters will help de-water the wet soil. You got to trust Tyler and his colleagues. What's your 30-day forecast? If your 30-day forecast is going to be hot and dry, I'm going to terminate my cereal rye early so it doesn't use up too much water. But I need to let it grow enough to keep the hot off the soil surface. If it's going to be cold and wet, I'm going to leave it grow to use up water so I get into the field. And cold and wet, they go together. A wet soil is colder simply because they have to heat the water and the soil. The dry soil warms up a lot faster. So again, a cover dewatering it actually warms the soil up faster. There's some work being done on SDS in beans and also soybean cyst nematode in beans. The covers are decreasing both of those because it dewaters the soil in the spring. A lot of work in Minnesota on that. And so the covers are seen as a positive in their colder environments.
Okay, well, thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.